Hello, I'm Owen Martin. I'm from Troop 418, Greenfield, New York. Here I am interviewing Peter Nicolaysen with my fellow friends at Troop 418, Greenfield, New York. This is Peter's grandson, Chase.
Hello.
He'll be helping me interview him. And here I am with Tanner, Carter, and Evan. This is part of my Eagle project as I'm working with the Veterans Breakfast Club. And we can start off. Peter, who are you and what did you do?
My name's Peter Nicolaysen, and in 1981, I joined the Navy. My brother-in-law was in the Navy, and he was in the nuclear power program. And I had just graduated from college, and I thought, well, that sounded interesting. So I went to the recruiting office, and they gave me a bunch of exams, which apparently I did pretty well on, because I said, you're going to go be a nuke. That's what they call us, nukes. And so off I went shortly thereafter to boot camp, which was really actually quite simple. At least for me, I didn't have any issue with it. I enjoyed it. It was fun. And from there, I went to nuclear power school, which was pretty hard. You think about college and kids go to school for maybe 20 hours a week, and then they get, homework and assignments. The classroom sessions alone at Nuke Power School were 40 hours a week. And then most people were on mandatory hours, because this is the military. Remember, they can order you to do things. And they would order people, you have to put in 20 extra hours of study a week. So most of these kids who go to Nuke Power School are doing 60 to 80 hours a week by military law of work. But in the ensuing 6 months, they push an associate's degree in nuclear technology down your throat. Particle physics, math, chemistry, reactor core design. It's really, really, really intense. And then once you've done that for 6 months, you go to the next phase of it, which is prototype, where you actually go to a, no kidding, nuclear reactor and you learn to operate it. And there are, a couple different ratings. You have electrical operators that operate the big electrical equipment that generates electricity. You have mechanical operators. They're the ones that actually operate mechanical turbines, pumps, anything that goes roundy, up and downy. They take care of that. And then you have the electrical technicians, and they're the ones that maintain and operate all of the high-end electronic equipment that measures reactor core parameters. You do that for 6 months, you get certified by the Department of Energy, and then off you go. In my case, I didn't go off. I actually got kept there as an instructor and spent 3 years as an instructor right out of school, which was nice because I had a brand new born daughter, which kind of made me actually get a chance to get to know her, which I liked. So anybody got any questions on that?
What did you do in boot camp?
What did I do in boot camp?
Yeah,
mostly you learn to follow procedure. So if you think about what young Navy nuclear sailors do, imagine yourself, you're 19, 20 years old, and you are in charge of a $20 million turbine. Okay, or in my case, I was in charge of reactor chemistry for a nuclear reactor. Okay, you can't afford to break it. So one of the things they start with very, very early on in the Navy is following procedures. How to follow procedures. So they teach you crazy things like how to fold your t-shirt. And can you get that right? Right? How to fold your underpants. Can you get that right? How to fold your socks. Can you get that right? Because if you can't learn to fold your socks right, do you think they're going to trust you with a nuclear reactor or shooting jets off of an aircraft carrier? Right? If you can't get the basics right. So they really start that in boot camp. And I didn't really have super hard problem with that, but we did have people that really couldn't do that. Okay, just couldn't get their head wrapped around the idea that there's you know, your way, the right way, the wrong way, and then there's the Navy way, and you're going to learn to do it the Navy way. It doesn't matter what you think otherwise. So that's what boot camp was all about. There was a physical portion too, but you know, the Navy doesn't really care too much about your physical prowess, so that was pretty easy. And I happened to go in the dead of winter, so there was no such thing as running or marching outside because there was so much ice that was, generally speaking, pretty dangerous. In fact, as I have one very, very fine memory, we were outside, about 4 or 5 of us once, and the wind kicked up, and it was slick ice, and we're all grabbing onto each other, and the wind's just blowing us along the ice. We're cruising down on this ice, you know, maybe 4 or 5 miles an hour, just getting blown along. And some jerk stopped, got out, yelled at us for sliding on the ice, and wrote us up for it. Right? Oh. That's life. Boot camp. That was fun.
How long did you serve?
20 years. So I retired. I served from 1981 to 2001. And now I have been out of the service now for a little over 20 years.
Before or after 9/11?
I got out right before 9/11. I retired. Actually, no, let me be clear about that. I retired after 9/11, but I already had my retirement paperwork in. And they did not put any stop loss in on my rating. So stop loss is when they say, you're at war and you don't get to get out. And they did do that. So if you were in any of the special forces like the SEALs, all of a sudden your contracts became infinite. Okay, so if you were signed up for a 6-year contract for the Navy SEALs, when they put a stop loss in, you're in for the duration at that point. And that's legal, and you know that when you go into it. So when you sign up for that, they tell you flat up that, yeah, you've got a 6-year contract, but if we go to war, all bets are off, buddy. It's part of the deal. I mean, even now, I'm a retiree. They can call me back. And by law, I have to go back.
Would you?
Yeah. Yeah. Not that I think war is a good idea, but they would call someone like me back to teach. Although since I already teach in the nuclear power program as a civilian, it would be, why would they do that, right? Since I'm already doing that, because that's what I've done as a civilian for the last 20 years is teach and work with sailors. In fact, there's odd little point of note on that. My youngest daughter just got off the USS Truman, which is an aircraft carrier, and she is a nuke. And she did exactly what I did in the Navy, reactor coolant chemistry. And I actually got to teach her. She came through my classroom at one point, which was interesting. Because when you spend your whole life telling people, well, if I told you what I do for a living, I'd have to kill you. I finally got to tell someone in my family what I actually do for a living, which was kind of neat. And she's down at the prototype facility in Charleston right now as an instructor down there. So I did 3 tours as an instructor right at the West Milton facility in Ballston Spa, New York, which is near Saratoga Springs. And I enjoyed all 3 of them. That's not to say it's easy. You know, we have a saying in the nuclear power program, and you may have to edit this out, I don't know, but they say 1 aw shit wipes out 1,000 attaboys. And it's very much true in our program. Now, we allow mistakes, but you don't want to make them because they tend to be really expensive. You know, you wipe the bearings on a $20 million turbine, people really don't think that's a good thing. And I was on 2 different submarines. I was on the USS Skipjack, which at the time, well, it held the transatlantic speed record for almost 20 years. It was really fast. It was the very, very first submarine ever built that was a true submarine. I know that might be confusing for you guys, but what you should realize is every submarine before the Skipjack had a V-shaped hull, it had a flat deck on top, and it was designed to be a surface ship that could dive underwater for combat. The Skipjack was the first submarine that was ever built with a whale-shaped hull was not designed to operate on the surface ever, except going in and out of port. And it was horrible on the surface. I mean, it was like, I remember once we came out of Groton, Connecticut. It's a 6-hour transient across Long Island Sound out at the dive point. And we were doing that in state 8 seas, which meant that the boat was rolling 43 degrees one way and then 43 degrees the other way for 8 straight hours. And at the end of each of those, we have these big things called the fairwater planes. You might have seen them on the sail. They look like wings that come out. And at the end of each one of those, that fairwater plane would hit the water. Boom! And the whole thing would shake. And then you'd start the next cycle, 8 hours. So you'd see most people on the boat ran around with a bag in their hand, which they merrily vomited into fairly regularly. I was one of the lucky ones. I never, ever once got seasick. That didn't mean I felt good in those conditions. They were brutal. But yeah, those things aren't designed to operate on the surface anymore. And every boat after that has been designed the same way with a hydrodynamic hull. And they're designed to operate underwater, stay underwater all the time, except to come in and out of port. That was, Skipjack was, at the time, if you go to the Submarine Museum in Groton, Connecticut, where they have the NR-1, they will tell you that the Skipjack was the fastest, most maneuverable submarine ever built. Now, they have built submarines since then that are all out faster, just like dragsters are faster than Maseratis. But the Skipjack was the Maserati, fastest, most maneuverable submarine ever built. And she was. We did some cool things on that boat. And that they call those fast attack boats. Those boats are designed to hunt and kill other submarines. They are the capital ships of the United States Navy. So what I mean by that is we talk about dominance in maritime platforms. Aircraft carriers maintain airspace dominance wherever they go. Now, one of our aircraft carriers is the 3rd largest air force in the world, just one. And we have like 13 of them, which might be overkill, but that's politicians' business. But one of our submarines will take out one of our carriers just like that, because our submarines are how we maintain sea space dominance. We break the back of one of those carriers in a heartbeat. So actually our submarine's job is to make sure the other guy's submarine doesn't do that. Okay, so we're out there tracking and making sure we will go with the surface action group, and our job is to protect the carriers. And what people don't know is all the other little boats, their job is to get in the way. Okay, they're not necessarily a polite way of saying it, but yeah, their job is to screen the carriers, pretty much. So that's what fast attack submarines do. And then I was also on a fleet ballistic missile submarine, the SSBN 740 USS Rhode Island. I started with her in the yards. We built it. I got there before she was actually a submarine. She was a pre-construction unit, pretty much empty inside. There wasn't even water in the reactor piping. It was empty. So I went through that whole thing, learned whatever valve was for in the entire reactor plant when you build something like that. Remember loading the reactor core, all kinds of things like that. It was really interesting. And then I did 5 deterrent patrols. And the job of those submarines is completely different than the job of the fast attack submarines. Fast attack submarines are there to guard aircraft carriers. Fleet ballistic missile submarines carry something called ballistic missiles. SSBN stands for, submarine, Navy, and the last N stands for nuclear. So it's a nuclear submarine. Those things go to patrol areas and they just sit there. And they're waiting for any order to launch missiles. It's not necessarily a pleasant thought. because that really comes under the concept of the end of the world as we know it. And like, you know, probably once a week we would man battle stations missile or something. They would say for WSRT, weapon system training exercise. And then everybody jumps up and does what they do. And then they would practice launching missiles. Probably the creepiest thing that ever happened the entire time I was on the Rhode Island was when they had us man battle stations missile and they didn't say anything else. And we're all like, is this an exercise? Is this real? Turns out it was just an exercise. Because if it was for real, they would say man battle stations missile for ballistic launch. And I never heard that. That's a good thing. They say those things are floating hotels. That's if you like hotels that are really, really crowded. They crew about 170, and they probably got the living space of 2 or 3 3-bedroom houses. So they're not huge, but they're the Skipjack was 243 feet long, and we crewed about 140 guys. And Rhode Island is somewhere in the 550, 560 feet long, and crews about 170. It was interesting. Went a lot of places in the Navy. I hit 22 different countries while I was in the Navy, which was nice. I think the coolest port I ever hit was we got to Ashdod, Israel, and Ashdod wasn't much, but I got to go on a day trip to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and our tour guide had a PhD in biblical history, and that had to have been the neatest thing I have ever done in my entire life. You're walking through, you know, 3,000–4,000 years of history, and you can see it written on the land in the excavations. It was just amazing. So I got that tour of the United States, you know, courtesy of the United States Navy. I would tell you nothing really super bad ever happened to me. I did have an accident once in a tank that's left me claustrophobic ever since. Those things can happen to people that aren't paying attention to what they're doing and don't really understand all the intricacies of it. I've been on submarines for fires and flooding casualties. We practice and train those things constantly. So when it did happen, it was just very automatic. You go into your training mode and you do what you're trained to do. You might have heard some of the same things from guys that, you know, shot guns in the Army. You train and you train and you train and you train. And when all of a sudden people are shooting at you, you're not thinking of getting hit and dying. You're mostly thinking about execute what you've been trained to execute. That's how you keep from freezing up with fear. So yeah, I've seen water coming into a submarine so stinking fast that it was blowing wind in your face, and you just did what you were trained to do. And we all got through it. Who's got questions?
What was the hardest thing on the job?
Hardest thing was learning to operate on almost no sleep. So I once went 90 hours with 9 hours sleep. I once worked for 2 weeks straight with 2 hours sleep a day. I think the longest I ever went without sleep at all was like 56 hours. To put it in perspective, on Skipjack, we had gone underway to a Unitas run, which is around the coast of South America, do exercises with the other Navy. And there were 4 guys that were in my rate, ELTs like myself. And originally we have 1 guy who stands underway ELT and the other 3 guys stand a rotating 3-shift duty in engine forward. So you're standing 8 hours on watch, 8 hours off watch, and the guy that's the underway ELT does all the other stuff. Then he got off the boat in Puerto Rico because he made officer programs, great for him, which left us 3 guys. So now we're standing 3 8-hour shifts, but now when you get off shift, you got to do the job of this ELT that left to Puerto Rico. And then Ethan got pneumonia. So now there's 2 of us. Instead of standing 2 an 8-hour shift, and you got some time off to do that other stuff. Now we're doing back-to-back 8-hour shifts, and when we're not on watch, we're doing the chemistry. And we did that for 3 weeks. So think about that. You guys are used to going to sleep every night, okay? You know, you were staying at 8 hours on watch, and then you are doing chemistry, radiation surveys, and then maybe you get a couple hours sleep, and then you're doing it again. So the sleep deprivation was by far the hardest thing to learn to deal with.
How much do you sleep a day now?
7 hours. I can drop down to 4 for a couple of weeks. But one of the things I taught my daughter very early on when I realized she was getting this business is to pay attention to her sleep inventory. And you're like, what the heck's a sleep inventory, right? And when you're living in a life like that, you actually pay attention to how many hours of sleep you get in a week. So you might go 24 or 30 hours of no sleep, but then if you can build your inventory up. So, you know, I used to tell her, well, normal people sleep about, you know, 8 hours a night. So, you know, 8 times 7, whatever that is. Pay attention to that number and try to, you know, approach it. So if you don't get a whole lot of sleep for a night or two, you know, I said, you know, you can usually survive if most people 6 hours bare minimum. So, you know, if you can hit 42 hours of sleep or 40 hours, that was the number I always worked with, 40 hours of sleep in a week, even if you don't get it night by night, but you get it, you know, maybe or 2 or 3 nights that you get that amount of sleep, you can sustain that kind of stuff. It wasn't easy though. I don't learn to do that. What else?
Can you tell us some submarine stories?
Submarine stories. Oh, well, you guys know that fleet ballistic missile submarines are broken into 2 crews. There's a blue crew and a gold crew. So they figured out really early on that if they want to keep these submarines on station, the mission of a fleet ballistic missile submarine is to be undetected by all forces, friendly and foe, which means you don't come up for air, you don't go into port, you're out there for 3 months and you contact no one. You don't even contact your families, okay? We would get these things called familygrams, which were 40 words. That was all you get, a 40-word familygram once a week from home, and they got nothing. But they figured out pretty early on that you put 140 guys locked up in a steel tube with a living space, total living space, probably a third of this room. Now remember, half the guys, you know, a third of the guys are asleep, a third of the guys are on watch, and a third of the guys are up doing stuff. So still, you're talking a room like this, 60 people. Try doing that for 3 months. See what happens to people. People get weird. Okay? People, it becomes a game to mess with each other. You know what? You ever had, you know, in school someone who's trying to mess with your head? You guys familiar with that concept of getting your head messed with? So one of the things submariners do to mess with each other's head is we go to great lengths to gross each other out. Just something we do. If you can make the other guy throw up, I kid you not, oh, if you can make him throw up, you won. Okay? So I don't know if I really want to go into the details of some of the things that were done, but pranks were common, okay? So I'll give you an example of one. This is nice, clean, Boy Scout kind of prank, right? You guys ever seen a rubber surgical glove? Now, not the new nylon ones, but the old rubber ones that were stretchy. Do you know how much water you can put in one of those things? You can fill those things up so they're like huge. So we once had an executive officer that we weren't particularly fond of. So a bunch of guys took a blanket and they set it down, and they took a hose and filled up one of these surgical gloves to the point of exploding. It probably had 20 gallons of water in it. Tied it shut, carried it on the blanket, and rolled it onto his bed and left. He, in his infinite wisdom, tried to get it off himself, which of course was a total fail. And then everything was very wet in his stateroom. You know, let's see what other kind of pranks we pull. There's this stuff called Prussian blue. It is a blue kind of ink dye that we use when we're checking the true pure surfaces of things. If you're trying to get an impression, it's hard to explain, but let's just suffice to say that it is the bluest blue of dye you'll ever see. It's so blue it's almost black, which makes it perfect for putting on handsets of telephones. Okay, so all our phones are what we call sound powered phones. There's no electricity. They're very much like a cup and a string, except the difference is at the cup end, you have a little magnet that vibrates and generates a current, which that current goes to the other end, which has a little and you can hear it, right? But you got to get right up on it and talk to it, right? You put it up to your mouth and you talk right into it. And if you put Prussian blue around that whole thing, of course, the guy's lips turn all blue, his ear turns all blue. Yeah, see, and that's a nice, clean, fun humor. Okay, imagine how twisted people get after 3 or 4 months of isolation, which is why they realized they had to have 2 different crews because it got too weird. Okay,
Was it different? Like, was there camaraderie in the blue and the gold crew, or were you guys always fighting each other with pranks?
We didn't really have much time to prank each other because turnover with the other crew is only 3 days. So you pull into port. 3 days later, it's their boat, and you're off of it. And you're still coming in to help do maintenance for about 3 weeks during a refit, but then they go to sea. So it was always the gold crew's fault, I will tell you that. Any problems that we ever found, they were the gold crew's fault, and they said the same thing about the blue crew. But we were, actually, most of us were pretty good friends.
Which one were you on?
I was on the blue crew. But originally I was the leading ELT for both crews. So when we were new construction, I had blue and gold that all worked for me. And it wasn't until we actually launched and got underway as an active service submarine that the crews separated. Let's see, there's this thing called halfway night that gets pretty extreme. All kinds of things happen during halfway night. There's talent shows and beauty shows and things go missing, like the commanding officer's door. We have pig races. You're like, what are pig races? Well, you guys are used to a platform that's the floor, it's kind of level. But you realize at a submarine we can change that, right? So the missile decks are really long. You got 24 missile tubes in there. And each missile tube is like 9-10 foot in diameter. So 12 times 10, 120 foot straight shot right down the missile decks. So we would manufacture these things that looked like pigs on wheels. And then we would race them down the missile decks because we'd put like a 3-degree down angle on the boat. And crews would run straight and true. And they were all kinds of, I mean, you got a bunch of brilliant people. You guys have any idea how smart these folks are?
All the nuclear, yeah.
Well, it's not just the nukes. I mean, but I'll put it in perspective. When in 1994, I was in Kings Bay, Georgia, and the guy that owned the computer shop down there, yes, there were computers in 1994, but this was pre-internet. Okay, there was something called American Online. But he put in a T1 line so we would have internet connectivity because he thought there was enough really smart people in the U.S. Navy that it would be profitable. And he was right. He sold it like 3 years later for like $17 million. But yeah, real smart people, because everybody on a submarine is like super high tech, even if they're not as super high tech as the nukes. Like you have the A gangers, they do all the, like they make the oxygen. They take care of the potable water, the feces, like your ship tanks, and all. They do all that. But those guys are mostly nuclear waste. So they were the ones that didn't make it through nuke school, but they were all really smart to start with. So yeah, it's just a brilliant, smartest bunch of people I've ever worked with in my whole life, bar none. And it was always, you know, the thing that I think most nukes struggle with getting out of the Navy is realizing they will never work with a group that smart ever again. And it can get really frustrating because you're getting out and you're just dealing with people that are like, well, you don't get it, do you?
It's harder to work with idiots than smart people.
Oh yeah. You know, they don't understand our humor. You know, you tell jokes and they're like, why is that funny? And maybe you need to know a little chemistry to know why it's funny, okay? What other questions you have? Did I tell you, was that enough submarine stories?
I mean, I'm fine with hearing the gross ones.
You want to hear a gross one? You can edit this out if you want, okay?
Yeah.
So we're at the very end of patrol, okay? And there's Hansen and Whitmer, two of the nastiest, dirtiest second-class petty officers I've ever known in my life. Probably ought to doubt the names. So everything's short by the end of patrol, right? Like you don't have milk, you don't have soda. All we had was coffee and pure water, which is nasty. Everybody's out of cigarettes. Everybody's out of chewing tobacco. Because you've been out to sea for 3 stinking months, right? And everything's running out. But so Hansen's got this big wad of chew in his mouth. And he's slobbering the tobacco. And Whitmer comes up and says, hey, Hansen, give me some chew. And Hansen's like, oh, I can't. That's the last of it. Whitmer says, well, give me some anyway. And the two of those boys locked lips in front of the whole M division and transferred half the chew from one to the other. 2 guys just went and threw up. I kid you not. They saw it, they run over the garbage can, and they threw up. Yeah.
Was that a skit that they planned out?
Oh, they probably planned it. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me with those two if it had not been planned. Yeah. But it was real. Okay. Planned or not, they actually did it. Okay. Which was just plain nasty. So there you go. That's just one of, I'm not going to tell anymore. I don't want to tarnish your poor young minds. But it's a different kind of world. Everybody knows everybody. Not only do we know you, we know how badly you smell. Okay. We know all your bad habits. I was once sitting on the toilet, minding my own business, and someone goes, Nicolaysen, is that you? Yeah, how do you know? He goes, well, you make very distinctive sounds. Like, really? That's how well you get to know your shipmates, okay? Strange world. But I mean, you never will ever know people as well as you know those people. And you learn how to create your own solitude around you. You have something called a rack, which is about the size of a coffin that you live in. It's got a curtain. That's it. On the Rhode Island, there were 9 of us in a bunk room. So the racks were stacked 3 high. You had 3 on the left, you had 3 on the back, and 3 on the right. So you're talking a 6-foot by 6-foot cube where you have 9 people living. And we had about 18 of those. And it was worse on the Skipjack. It was even tighter and closer. So yeah, you get to know everybody. Imagine that. My last big job on the boat was berthing coordinator, so I got to take care of all the bunks and the sheets and the blankets and the curtains. And I was also tank coordinator, so I got to be the one that was responsible for proper closeout of like 240 tanks. There's tanks everywhere on a submarine. I got to go on a lot of them to do closeout inspections. That was kind of neat. Because we have to be real careful. You don't want a wrench hanging out in your tank. They make noise. And you know the other name for the submarine services? They call us the silent service. Yeah. Because really, you know, nobody knows we're there. You know, there's all kinds of jokes on the internet where you see a picture of the ocean and the caption is submarine war games. But there's nothing there. Exactly. But the way we detect each other is listening. So what makes noise on a submarine? Propeller makes noise, right? Pumps make noise. People make noise. Okay? So there's actually an operational condition where we're not allowed to get out of bed except to go on watch. And if you're not on watch, you're in bed. For no other reason that if you're in on your mattress, you can't make noise for those other guys to detect you, because it travels a long way underwater. We can hear surface ships 40,000 yards out. Convert that to miles. If your head can wrap around that, it's like 20 miles away. We'll hear them. We're tracking them. They say that Trident-class submarines can only be tracked by the absence of noise. You're looking for where the silence is. They're that quiet. We try to keep them that way. But that has to do with the war games aspect of things, which are interesting. And I spent many, many years doing that job, tracking other vessels, learning to get good at it, putting in. You know, this is like at the end of my nuke career. I got bored with being a nuke, so I went forward, and I discovered, much to my amazement, because they spend your life in nuclear world telling you the greatest thing since sliced bread, but really you just push around weapons systems. That's our job. We push. We're also Rhode Island Power and Lighting Company, hot water, sewage, things like that. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. I had a great career. I still have dreams about it. It's not the least bit unusual for me to wake up going, "Oh, it's just underway." It's always weird though, because I'm an old man now underway with a bunch of kids, so it's strange. But I am way too old to be doing that game again. It was just, it's tough on the body. You know, we spend our life walking on wooden floors. It's totally different when you're walking on stainless steel. It's tough on the joints.
Do you find yourself replicating any habits or lifestyles in your daily life?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We have all kinds of things that the kids get annoyed when I provide watch team backup. That was something that you know, in the nuclear power world, we're a team, and we're always backing each other up and watching out for each other and taking care of each other. It's a cool thing about the Navy. I mean, you don't show up for work. You know what they do? They come and find you, because they're worried about you might be in a ditch in a car somewhere. Not like the civilian world. You don't show up for work. They may call you, but they're not going to come looking for you. So civilians take offense if you like, "Hey, did you check that?" Right? It's like, "Don't you trust me?" But in the nuclear power world, it's like, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to back each other up. You're supposed to remind each other what's right. You keep standards with each other. And it's a constant, it's like the Super Bowl football team, except you're, you know, hundreds of feet under the water in a steel tube, making sure bad stuff doesn't happen. And yeah, you do carry those habits forward. I know, Chase, you've suffered from some of it. You know, even my wife gets frustrated with me sometimes, and like, "Hannah, I'm not trying to look over your shoulder, and I'm just watch team backup." Well, the other big thing is communications, because it's so easy to mess up communications. And we work really hard in that world also to communicate clearly. So there's this hysterical chain of communications. Like if an order goes out from the engineering, the watch officer, he'll tell like the reactor operator, hey, reactor operator, tell the feed station to go start the #2 feed pump. And then the reactor operator has to repeat that back exactly as he said it. You know, he says, to feed station, start the #2 feed pump. Reactor operator I. And he picks up the phones and he calls feed station from the engineering officer, watch, start #2 feed pump. And guess what that guy down there has to do? He has to repeat it back verbatim also. So you get this long daisy chain of verbatim complete repeat backs, which of course makes it seem like it takes forever to do anything. But the net effect is the right things go out to the right people at the right time so that the right stuff happens. So that the wrong stuff doesn't get started up, the wrong stuff doesn't get shut off. Because there's nothing like being 400 feet in the water and all of a sudden it's pitch black and quiet. Like, have you ever been in a power outage where all of a sudden your house goes completely black? Now imagine being 400 feet underwater and it goes pitch black and quiet. It's like, oh, that's bad. That's really bad. Okay. Once we were all sitting there and we were at the pier in an electric boat, and all of a sudden we're standing there and there's this roar like a jet engine taking off. And I mean, it's loud. It's probably 150 decibels. We're all stuffing earplugs and ear mufflers on, and we're looking at each other and going, we have to go find this. Something has just happened. And we went to find it. And we did. There was a valve open and somebody had started a 3,000-pound air charge. And we had 3,000-pound air blowing out this pipe. Not something you want to walk in front of, guys. We had brooms with us. We were waving brooms in front of us because you don't want to step in front of 3,000-pound air coming out. That kind of stuff can cut you in half. There's always exciting things like that going on. One time I almost took out a helicopter. Yeah, so we have these things called launchers where we can launch things that measure water temperatures, and they're like air cannons. Think of it like an air cannon. But we can put smoke signals in them and all kinds. So when we play war games with other things, like especially surface boats, one of the things we do to indicate we just shot them was to shoot up a green flare. So we'll be at PD and periscope depth, I'm sorry. And then I was manning the aft launcher with a green combo flare. And I got the word to shoot. And just as I slammed the lever forward to shoot it, I heard, no! It was too late. It was off. And we almost put it in the door of a helicopter that happened to come over us. Yeah. I heard about that. We used to use those same launchers to shoot grapefruit at the ship next to us. Yeah, see, I mean, there's always fun things you can do, right? What?
Take off a door.
Take off a door, shoot the grapefruit from the launcher. Yeah. I would encourage any of you, if you're really smart, that it is the one program in the military services that you can actually make a lot of money at. So my youngest daughter is in that program. She re-enlisted for 2 years. They paid her $100,000. Okay. So there is good money in the nuclear power program, but it is every bit as hard and as difficult as hard, and much shorter. And you don't get the latitude of doing what the heck you want. Okay, they're going to tell you what they want. So yeah, I do it again. But again, I work with those guys every day. I mean, right now we're out at West Milton refueling the SAG reactor. We've got about a year left. That's done. Public knowledge, I can talk about that. That's press release stuff. But yeah, it's been a good career. I'm 60, almost 65 now. Figure about 5.5 more years, I'll actually finally retire. So Now I work in radiation controls at this point in my life. Do a lot of just esoteric things, whatever I can invent to do to make somebody else's life better. I get to do. I have a lot of latitude at this point because I've been doing it for 42 years now. So one of the top end experts in my field. So they expect me to invent stuff.
Did you prefer a submarine of the two?
Oh, yeah. Oh, if I'd have preferred one or the other?
Yeah.
No. I was younger on the Skipjack. It's much more like it's a bachelor's life, young, exciting. We didn't hit many ports on the ballistic missile submarine. We hit ports on the Skipjack. So you get to see the world. You don't get to do that on a ballistic missile submarine. On the other hand, ballistic missile submarines have a very, very regular schedule. At the time I was on it 20 years ago, it was 116 days underway and 116 days in port. And you could plan 2 years ahead where you were going to be for Thanksgiving. My wife at the time when I was on the fast attack boat was like, there's some guy in Washington, D.C. with a dartboard. And there's a dart that says Skipjack. He closes his eyes and he throws it, and that's where we go, and that's when we go. And you would never know. So there was no schedule, there was no planning. I mean, obviously there was, but we couldn't tell from our end. You were just always covering some up. Some boat gets broke, you're covering their op. The nice thing was that wherever we went, we'd go to port. And we'd, hang out. I loved Cocoa Beach. I spent a lot of time in Cocoa Beach on the Skipjack because they have a submarine port down there at the Cocoa Beach. It's Port Canaveral. You guys have all heard of Port Canaveral or Cape Canaveral, where we launch space rockets from? Yeah, Cape Canaveral. Okay. There's also a submarine facilities there. It's where we do all the telemetry for our ballistic missile submarines. So they have to be able to pull in and out of there. And when they're not in there, they take in the fast boats. And it's like 5 miles north of Cocoa Beach, Florida. So then we go to Cocoa Beach and enjoy the beaches and the sun, and the Ron John surf shop and all that good stuff. But yeah, I'd do it again if I was a lot younger.
How has military life changed since you were in?
Well, for starters, they let women in, which I think was a good thing. It creates a balance. The logic of male warriors that we had for the last 10,000 years of human history kind of falls to the wayside when you're into mechanized warfare. You don't have to be Hercules to sit at a reactor controls instrumentation panel and start and stop pumps, shim the reactor rods in and out kind of stuff. You just don't need that. And for things that are big and heavy, you have equipment to help you, and there's also other, you can always put 2 people on it instead of 1. So the women change things a lot. And right now we've actually got women on submarines. And we don't have them, I believe, on the fast attack boats yet because the facilities just aren't there for them. But they are now on the Fleet Ballistic Missile submarines, the Trident class. So that is a huge change. Also, they've done away with the 18-hour day. So for most of the time, all the time I was on submarines, we lived an 18-hour day. Now they run a 24-hour day. They're trying to keep up people's normal circadian rhythm kind of going. So I hear it's better and it's easier, the adjustments back and forth between the two. But yeah, the two were different, and I liked them both. So What else?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Al, you got any questions over there?
Yeah, maybe you can answer this, but do they have better materials now to keep those submarines that were silent, that they can't hear what's going on, like particle sounds and stuff?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, that was an evolution. To give you a kind of sense of it, my first submarine, the Skipjack, was really loud. I mean, when she came through the Straits of Gibraltar to respond to the sinking of the Thresher, they basically said they could hear that in the Caribbean at Autech. That's how far sound trends goes underwater and how loud that boat was. And that's part of the way, because the main engines were actually hard mounted right to the hull. I mean, if you think about just solid steel, you bolt these engines to the hull. They take all the vibrations from those engines, they put them right to the hull, and they transfer them right to the water. Now, if you go and look at the engine of your car, how is it mounted? Anybody know? Al, you know how your engines are mounted?
I don't know.
Well, they're mounted on engine mounts, but the engine mounts aren't necessarily hard. There's rubber in there to absorb the vibrations. So as submarine technology advanced, they start mounting things differently. So there's sound silencing on the mounts, so that stuff doesn't transmit to the water. And some of that is very classified how we do that. So I'm staying very general on that. But yes, they go to extraordinary lengths to sound silence submarines.
Any new ones on mine are being built now?
Yeah, we're working right now on the replacement for the Trident class submarines, the Columbia project. So the Trident class submarines are the big fleet ballistic missile submarines, our nuclear deterrent. It's probably the strongest leg of our nuclear triad. Those boats are, I mean, the 740 boat that I was on was built in, I think we commissioned it in 93. So, it's what, 30 years old right now? They just, I think, refueled it. And she'll probably go for another 20, 30 years. But they're definitely old. And that was the 740. And that class started like, there was only the 743 was the last of the Trident class fleet built. So again, 92, 93, we were building almost the last boats of that. Fact is the 43 boat was in the shipyards with us being built at the same time we were being built. They came out 6-8 months later. So the earliest boats of the Trident class were built in the 80s. So we're replacing that whole class of submarines with a new class that's still being designed.
So what do they do with this scrap them? Pretty much.
Pretty much. They get scrapped. The exceptions to that are things like the ones that go down. They took 2 of the Los Angeles class down to Charleston to be prototype training platforms. And they're replacing the old S5W class with the Los Angeles class of the training platforms. So my daughter is going to be an instructor on the 711 boat, which is Los Angeles class fast attack that they basically, we joke, we called it getting welded to the pier. It's almost what it's like. And they operate right there as training platforms. Yeah, all the other stuff the joke, we call it getting mated to razor blades, but really there's various levels of layup that when you get into looking at that stuff, you can figure out what they're actually doing. Some boats, they're going to want to lay up so that they can recall them if there's a war. So I don't know whether you guys are probably too young to remember this, but in World War II, we had these things called battleships. right? You ever been down to like Massachusetts at Fall Rivers? Any of you guys been there? Yeah, you know how big that is, right? Those are World War II. But did you know that when we mothballed them, we mothballed them in a status that we could recall them? And we did during the first Gulf War. We brought back the Iowa, I think it was. And we called all these old freaking 60-year-old men out of retirement to basically teach the young guys how to operate it. So, you know, it's possible I could get called back or something like that. But again, like I said, it's because I'm already teaching the young guys how to operate that stuff. Very unlikely. But yeah, so there's all kinds of different levels to your question. They don't just destroy them. Other questions?
From like above water, could like a ship hear that skipjack submarine? Like how far could like above water?
Depends. If they had good sonar, quite a long way. The biggest challenge you have on a boat like that is most surface boats make so much stinking noise that they're not going to be able to hear you over that. Okay, so you have to be really quiet to start with to be able to hear those kind of signals. To answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm all set.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you for your service. This interview has been really nice.
I had a really good time, and I encourage anybody that has any interest in that kind of thing to consider the Navy and the submarine service.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Nicolaysen.
Take care.